Um, yes, and as you point out, there are various points that many commentators have made that, you know, suddenly the lockdown has dramatically lessened our demands on the earth, and the supposedly impossible changes to consumer culture have happened overnight. And of course, these are temporary measures. What sort of changes people are willing to make permanently is quite a different matter. Going more deeply into the spiritual lessons, it's certainly true that many people are discovering unexpected riches in this new normal. They can actually hear the birds for a start. They have time to explore their locality, to look at the plants and try and grow them. And also something that I think is very interesting is what one can call an asceticism of obedience, the limiting of one's own desires, whims, for the sake of the needs of others. And that's something that many people embrace. It's also the sort of thing that environmentalists have been talking about for years. But now people suddenly feel that they're part of a greater whole, and this gives value and dignity to our most insignificant actions, or indeed inactions. You know, not going out is suddenly a heroic contribution to a greater cause. And this is also a profoundly ecclesial approach, this awareness that we are all part of a body, we all play our part in something much larger than ourselves. And many people certainly would want to incorporate some of this simpler life into a new normality, but then there are the countervailing pressures. You know, we've just been told that public transport could be dangerous, so prefer private cars. One of the striking things about this crisis is that, in contrast to Second World War, with which people keep comparing it, this really feels like a crisis for a post-Christian age. It's, you know, in many ways a crisis without reference to God, to quite a chilling degree. But it's instructive, of course, to see the ways in which Christ finds his way back in, very obviously in love for neighbor. You know, there are going to be a whole lot of other people who are surprised at the last day that they've been ministering to Christ, but also through the natural world, which always points back to its nature, however much people may try to focus on it for its own sake. And there's a wonderful passage in one of Olivier Clément's books where he quotes the saying, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." And then he goes on to say, but the world too is a word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And in a way, for lay people, and in my own experience, the closure of church buildings has removed that temptation to try and pin down the sacred and the sacramental elsewhere to the church where we go to for high days and holidays. And our experience has become much more like monastic experience, where everything we touch refers us to God. One of the much less welcome effects is that the virus brings us face to face with creaturely fragility. I mean less welcome for society generally. I mean, one might hope that for Christians this is not so unwelcome. But we are being firmly and forcefully reminded that life and death is in the hands of God. We are not in control. The irony, of course, is that this whole raft of draconian measures is precisely predicated on the assumption that control should be the norm. We're trying to control our way out of the crisis. We're going to manage things until we can produce a vaccine. And of course, you know, we all regard that as a welcome prospect, because it's a visceral human fear sudden death. It's something that we pray for protection from. And a sudden and unexpected death greatly exacerbates the pain of losing someone we love. But it seems that in the general public reaction, there's also another element, a sense that unpredictable, deadly disease is seen as a sort of insult to this whole edifice of technological civilization. You know, this is something that we shouldn't have to contend with in the 21st century. It goes against, in fact, that culture of control, which arguably lies at the root of all our environmental problems, because basically we've been demanding of the earth more than it can give. And I think the response from the Christian tradition has to be welcome back to the real world. That's why we talk about the world of the fall. Imperfection, mortality, these things are built in. You know, we can juggle things a bit, we can pull here and push there, but basically we can't eliminate that characteristic of the world. So death is something that we remember it so as to make best use of our life. It's not something we can just brush under the carpet. And it does seem now we're actually seeing the beginning of a discussion of the unmentionable, of death and of how we value life. And this, I think, is likely to continue, and it'll be very interesting to see where it goes, and extremely important for the Christian voice to be heard. I'm not talking so much about ethical questions, you know, how do we value life? How do we compare value of different people's lives? We actually need to challenge the very idea that physical survival is the paramount value. And effectively that means rediscovering the soul, by which I don't mean a sort of immaterial thing that takes up residence in the body at a certain point and eventually leaves, but the soul as the fullness of the person's life, which is manifested, of course, in physical life on earth, but isn't bounded by it. And this perspective affects every aspect of life on earth. And it's something where there really is a big difference between the Christian and the secular understanding, and something I think we have to bear witness to.